we'll hear a welcome to Green Spring from our board member host, Pete Stroud. And then we'll pass around some materials about Green Spring, and Jack Cumming will give us some statistics about Green Spring. And then once we have learned about Green Spring, we will go around the table and introduce ourselves to each other. So introduction of Green Spring first, and introduction of each other second, if that's okay.
Okay. My name is Saul Schmidlap, and I live here at Green Spring. We have two other Green Springers, Ron Patterson, and Mary Sue Garner. They are the directors from Green Spring to NaCCRA. And I can tell you that this event would not have taken place had it not been for Mary Sue. She has been a great one for delegating other people to do things, and they did. And it's been a real pleasure to just look at the problems that we were going to have and say, hey, can you help me here and there? So she's got volunteers for everything. Green Spring is just under 2,000 people. I don't know, Ron, Mary Sue, do you know how many acres we have here? It strikes me it's around 100, but I don't know. And if you look outside, we're surrounded by forest and wild animals and so on. Every now and then we get a snake that wanders up this way, and we had one on the concrete entrance into one of the neighborhoods, and security came and put it into a box, and the gal who was at the front desk that night came out with her cell phone, took a picture of it, and sent it to poison control or whoever, and they said, that's a copperhead, don't throw it away. They were just going to throw it back in the woods. And so they came out the next day and picked up the dead body of this snake. There's a walking path that goes through some of the woods. The material you're going to get has a map of Green Spring, and all of the buildings, and I think there are 14, are connected. You can walk the entire loop inside. It's about a mile. We have 3 communities here. This is Village Square. It is, I don't know whether it's the most recent or not, but each of the communities has a bank, beauty shop, barber, a dining room, and then there are additional unique ones around in the different communities. This community has the TV studio, the theater, and a large room for meetings and so on. Where I live is Hunter Crossing, and we have a conference center, and that's the primary. We have a large dining room and kind of a snack bar. Town Center, which is the first building that you passed coming in, that's where the headquarters is of the administrators, and that is where the fitness center is, where the pool is, where the medical center is. Then one of the buildings that shows up on the map but is not necessarily considered a community is the facility for long-term care, for independent living with assistance, and for Alzheimer's patients and so on. About 2,000 employees. I gave Jack the demographics. he could tell you how many are married, and it always tickles me because there's one or two on there that they don't know. And, we have a couple that are not married but live together. I'm sure to the horror of some of our residents, but nonetheless, it's a pretty easygoing crowd. Was there a fee for the copying?
Not yet, but I think we do want to pay for them eventually.
Well, generally speaking, it's Green Spring business, and so they will not charge.
As my mother said, take the money.
Well,
We're glad to have you here, and we will do what we can to be hospitable and do what we can for you. If you have a question or a problem or anything, let me know, and we can solve it.
well, thank you, Pete. I have to say, we're enormously grateful to Pete for really working hard at organizing our meeting for us in spite of an intense family crisis. And we're very grateful to Mary Sue Garner for helping tie up all the many threads that have to come together, and to Ron Patterson, and also to an old friend from California, Elaine Sorensen, who has also helped make this meetings possible. When I came here yesterday for the first time, Mary Sue was quite ready for me and made me, gave me the confidence that everything was under control, and indeed it is. And I also had the feeling that this place is a warm, welcoming place as a matter of habit. It's not that they were doing something that was terribly unusual, that Green Spring is a place that is just very nice to come to. So we're very grateful all around for the help of these friends. I'm going to pass around material about Green Spring for you, and while I'm doing that, Pete has given Jack some interesting demographics about the Green Spring population. So Jack, if you don't mind, you can maybe give us a little summary.
Well, I'm not sure exactly how I got appointed to this role. However, I suspect it might have something to do with my being an actuary, and he figured we get data, so it's hard to make data be interesting. However, there are 1,920 residents. So if I were to, let me just, well, thank you, Bill. Frank, how many residents do you have at Horizon House?
450.
450. And how many residents do you have?
590.
590. And Jean, how many residents are there?
750.
750. Okay, so that's getting up there. Jean, what do you?
Tiny with 300.
What?
300.
300. Okay.
425.
400. Oh, okay. That's these are more than I would have thought. How about you, Bob? How many?
271.
271.
310.
310. Well, we're 220. So, by that standard, I thought we were fairly normal. But I guess we all think our home CCRC is the normal one. But so Green Spring is not quite 10 times the size of ours, but probably 9 times the size. And to me, that's quite impressive. So
We're the largest in Virginia, and all of the other CCRCs look to us for how much money have you, or how much have you changed your dues and so on. And we are the leader in the state.
So they look to Erickson for leadership and.
Erickson Living is the company that we have hired to manage us.
Okay. Okay. And so when you say we have hired,
Green Spring.
okay, so,
And we bought,
and by we, is that the resident
Yes.
group here
Yes.
has hired Erickson Living to manage?
and we.
So are you in effect the owners here then?
We bought the real estate from John Erickson sometime before his bankruptcy. So we were not affected at all.
How is the board selected?
The board, because Erickson Livings manages, let's say 15 or 16 facilities, they have a board that is made up of sometimes outside people, sometimes people whose parents are in one of the facilities. I think it's maybe 11, one of whom is a Green Spring resident, and he's a voting member. We have a lady here that hounds me regularly because she feels that the state of Virginia ought to require the facilities to have resident members on the board. And she is particularly interested in having 2 members at Green Spring because we're so large. And I say to her, it's difficult for me to try and sell the fact that we need 2 when there are a number of communities in Virginia that don't have any members on the board.
Right.
So everybody's got the same kinds of problems.
Well, yeah, that was more interesting than these data probably. So I think that, I found that just very, very interesting. Anyway, they're roughly 2/3 female, 1/3 male. That's fairly common. I think most of the percentage numbers here are comparable to what I've seen from other CCRCs. Generally, what may be a little different is that the preponderance is in the category which is called widowed, which I assume means widows and widowers. It's non-gender specific. The second highest at about 70% of the size of the widowed group are married. So I don't know how many people move in here as couple, or maybe that a lot of people wait till they lose a spouse and then they move in, or
Both, but there are a lot of people that move here. Like, for instance, we've got a large number of people who came from this area, and another large number of people whose children live here.
Yes.
And because Washington is, as you can imagine, a hotbed of activity always, and there's always people moving here, we have a pretty high level of residents with an awful lot of background, amazing military, government retirees. We've got ambassadors and generals and whatever.
well, that's what I've always thought. Our resident group was the most exceptional resident group on earth, but now I find that there are challengers to this high honor, and what is one to do? Remarkably, they have 10 people over 100. Now we have, I think, 3 because we just lost one. So 3 out of 220. You have 10 out of 2,000, but that's certainly an impressive number. And 60% of them are living in independent living, which corresponds with what we've found is that people who live to that, there's a good reason to live that age because you don't die of some dread disease, so it's best to live long if you can. They have 3 people under age 65. So there are more people over 100 than under 65, and that says something about how these communities have been positioned to appeal to the upcoming generation. I think that is, in my opinion, foreshadowing something.
62 is the minimum age.
62 is the minimum age. Well,
Even for a spouse.
okay.
In other words, we can have people younger if their spouses are people older.
Nope.
Yes,
Oh, yes?
yes.
Okay.
Yes, I've met a few people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, and I think those 3 people are spouses of, because I thought the minimum age was 65.
Yeah.
62.
And we have one dependent son,
And I got
Oh, you have one
I was old enough, it didn't matter.
Oh, that's interesting.
not
Bill,
able to
Bill,
live.
you want to say something?
I say, and we have one dependent son
One dependent son living.
living in, yes.
Okay.
We have one dependent son, both parents passed away, and he has maintained the apartment. He has Parkinson's, I believe, and so he has continued, and I think they made sure they came and had him as a part of the contracts.
Right.
So Bob has continued very basically to be able to live on. I think Bob is probably now getting close to the 65.
Right.
Boy, some of these side comments are the most interesting part. I'm glad you suggested we do the Democrat, because I mean, I think we have the time for this, and because we don't have anybody who's really disabled. We do have one resident whose son needs permanent residential care, but he would not be allowed to live in our community under the, as I understand it, the way they operate. And I thought that was a general thing, probably a legal thing, but he was in a motorcycle accident and it damaged his mind. The preponderance of there are two preponderances here of almost equal size. The group who've lived here for over 10 years and the group who've lived here for fewer than 3 years. Those are about the same size. That's sort of kind of interesting. The average number of years so far, well, that would be meaningless because the community is still maturing, so every year stays open, you probably add to that, so we'll skip that. What I then, Pete gave me, and I'll show it here to people at home, but anyway, he gave me a sheet showing the average age on admission, and I find that more interesting because the demographics at admission tells you how where your community is trending and how it's being viewed in the marketplace. And there, it's very slight, it's been fairly uniform, but very slight upward tilt, which I think is characteristic of what I'm hearing just anecdotally is the case everywhere. So for the class of 2012 in independent living, the assisted living age has gone up quite sharply, but for whatever reason. But I think that's because what's happening is that both in skilled nursing and in assisted, they're going to higher and higher acuity care, and they're keeping people in independent longer. But the independent living has an average age here of 81.2. And that probably characterizes the kind of work, because you come and say, is this a place where I belong? And you look at the people there and you say, oh my goodness, I'm only 70, I probably might not fit in there. So this is something that to think about. That's what I got out of the day. Was that what I was supposed to do? Okay.
Thank you, Jack, that was excellent, thank you very much. Are there any questions for Pete or Mary Sue or Ron about Green Spring?
How old is Green Spring?
It's 15, 16, 17 years. Now, not all of the buildings.
No, but you've been here.
We each are issued a number, and I had dinner one night with number 28. And she moved in when there was just one building. And I said, well, you talk about an optimistic outlook on life. And she said, well, you know, they had no dining room, they had no medical situation, they had no chapel. And she said, well, we'd go out to listen to the birds, and all you could hear was heavy equipment. And she
moved in when?
Sir?
When did she move in?
Well, she was number 28.
Okay.
So it was just one building at that point, and she watched them build the others.
Wow.
Amazing. In 15 years, 15 to 20 years. In 15 to 20 years, you've grown from one building to what you are today.
Well, we have 14 buildings, and in the package that you have, there's a map. This is a map of Green Spring inside here, and you'll see the number of the buildings and the names on the side. And it's a fairly compact grouping, but you'll also note that almost totally surrounding us is forest like that.
So-
It's a park, it's actually a park, we will not ever build it.
Yeah,
Oh, I see.
So you're fully built out now?
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
because
you
as
are
I
fully
understand it,
built
the
out.
Erickson model was to try to cater to middle America instead of just affluent America by having larger communities, because just like a larger cruise ship can have a lower unit cost, a larger CCRC results in a lower unit cost per resident. And
I heard earlier, maybe some of you have heard also, that all these buildings, many buildings are connected, so one can go from one to the other indoors.
Indoors, yeah.
So that when it had to snow 2 weeks ago, no one had to go out in the snow, resident had to go out in the snow. You can get around them. The other thing I heard was that if you're an exercise buff and walking is your exercise, by walking the circumference, you walk a mile.
oh,
Walking in the
Oh, the
circumference
inside.
indoors. The indoor circumference walk is a mile. So in rain or shine, you can walk around the circle 4 or 5 times, and you get your
And
exercise.
there are those that do that.
Yeah.
So,
do you have any staff living on premises?
No. But
Peter Erickson built all of the buildings over a number of years.
yeah,
And from the very beginning, did he have a plan to build this many buildings?
I am unable to tell you what his plan
Mary's
was.
just nodding her head.
That's what I heard.
Okay.
I
And
wasn't here then.
so when was the last building built?
8, 10 years ago.
Before he went bankrupt?
Yes. But he spoke to us some years ago, and basically, he was looking for a place for his parents, and didn't like the models that he saw. And in Baltimore, a seminary came on the market, and he bought the seminary. Beautiful grounds, the chapel is just spectacular, as you can imagine, for a seminary. And that gave him the idea to expand. Well, when he expanded, he said the biggest problem that he developed later on was that he didn't create 2 companies. He's got a development phase and a management phase. And he would use the money from the management phase to do the developing. Well, that meant when he had a loan, or several, I guess, for development, and one of the banks said, well, we need you to repay the loan because the market was terrible. The economy was going down. And he said, I don't have the money. I mean, I've got income, and that's paying for more and so on, but I don't have the cash to repay you because it was a 10-year loan. And the bank said, well, we don't care, we want our money. And he said, well, you understand that if we go into bankruptcy, you're gonna get a small percentage. And the bank persevered, and so he filed for bankruptcy in Dallas. And that is apparently a very favorable bankruptcy venue. And he sold ultimately the management company to a fellow Baltimorean who had been an assistant to him in the past. And Jim Davis is now the head of Erickson Living. And they are hired by Greenspring to manage our facility.
Thank you. If people are ready, I will now call the roll of the board members, and then we'll go around the table and introduce everyone. The calling of the roll is just a formality so that we can get into the minutes that there is a quorum. I have regrets from one board member, from Marlene Varner, but I think every other board member is here. Walt Boyer,
Here?
Jack Cumming,
Here?
Jean Hurley,
Here?
Judy Moss,
Here.
Bob Nicholson.
Here.
I'm here, Dan Seeger, Peter Straub,
Here.
and that's it. So,
Ruth Walsh also, who is ex officio.
yes, Ruth Walsh, our past president, is a member, a non-voting member. She also said regrets. Thanks for reminding me. Okay, so we have a quorum, but we'll have introductions that are just a little bit more full than that as we go around the table. Perhaps I could suggest that as we go around the table, we say our names, we say whether we're a board member or a guest, we mention our home community, and maybe one other thing you want to say about yourself.
Like how many NaCCRA members you recruited last year?
That may be what, you may want to put that in. But
Just popped out, I don't know.
Yeah, somehow it just popped out. Okay, so I'll begin. I'm Dan Seeger. I'm a member of the board. I'm currently serving as president. I've been serving for slightly less than a year. And I live at Pennswood Village in Newtown, Pennsylvania, which is in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, about 30 miles north of Center City, Philadelphia. And my background is that I was a worker in the American Friends Service Committee.
My name is Mary Sue Garner, and I've been a resident here for 3.5 years. As Peter told you, I was a teacher for 45 years, and I am a life member of NaCCRA and BACCRA.
Bravo, bravo.
Yes.
What did you teach, Mary?
I taught algebra and geometry, mostly to 9th graders.
Oh, math
Oh.
teacher. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's audited our figures on the membership.
I'm Pete Straub. I live here, been here for 5 or 6 years. I was a practicing lawyer for 50 years, as a prosecutor, as a public defender. And one time I looked around and didn't see many old trial lawyers. And then I reevaluated that, and I didn't see many sober old trial lawyers. So I shifted into much more of a family practice, and for the last 10 or 15 years, I was an elder law attorney, and had clients in most of the facilities in this area, and none of them compared with Greenspring, and so my health is such that long-term care is always a concern. And, we moved here partly because of that, and partly because we sold our house to our oldest son. With the gracious assistance of the First National Bank of Dad. And, we enjoy his grandchildren, and we have grandchildren in Pennsylvania that are visiting this week.
Okay, I'm Bob Nicholson. My 3 credentials are, until last fall, I was the United States Soccer Federation referee for youth and varsity soccer. I've been on the Amtrak National Committee for 3 or 4 years, and I'm a veteran Presbyterian Church USA minister that still meddles around in church affairs, and I'm the vice president of membership, and I live in Seattle, Washington, at Aljoya at Thornton Creek, and I hope I get through this without croaking.
And apparently they don't have any lemons in Seattle, so he's collected them here.
That's right. And that's about it.
Thank you, Bob. Bill?
And I'm Bill Ratcliffe, officially William, but always known as Bill. I'm a guest. I live at Ingleside at King Farm in Rockville, Maryland. Ingleside has existed for 6 years, and I've lived there for 5. We moved in because 6 years ago my life expectancy for 5 years was very small. Fortunately, thanks to who knows what, here I am, alive and well and enjoying it. So I'm active in NaCCRA. I'm the vice president, and in July it's anticipated we'll take over as president of NaCCRA, so we may have connections that way in the future. I'm an engineer by training, electronics. I was in the telecoms industry in England. When I was 50-ish, I was divorced from my first wife. Kids had left home, gone to university, and I met this charming American lady. Ended up moving to America, having an American wife, and very much enjoyed living here for the last 20-odd years.
I should interrupt to mention that Bill Ratcliffe is a candidate member of this board. And so if his candidacy is approved tomorrow, and if he becomes president of
NaCCRA, Maryland Continuing Care Residents Association.
that will increase our connectedness to state associations by having a third president of a state association on our board.
I would look to my neighbours here to see how that works and visit it. When Dan first raised the subject, I thought, am I taking on too much? And he pointed out others managing.
Well, I'm Jack Cumming. I'm an outgoing board member, so I guess this is my last, probably my last meeting. And I live at Carlsbad by the Sea Retirement Community in California, and I'm not sure that I can match you, although when I was somewhere around, I forget now, I did go divorced and was single then for a long time, and then I met a wonderful Bostonian who was born in Schenectady, but she considered herself kind of a Bostonian, and she didn't want to live in New York, and I couldn't get a job in Boston, so we now live in California. So that's about it. By profession, I'm an actuary, and so I take a considerable interest in the financial structuring of CCRCs, and that's of interest to some of the board. I'd say not to most, but it is of something that we all depend on, and so it's been my hope that we might improve in that area, and there's still a great deal of work to be done.
I'll interrupt again to say that we'll have time later in the meeting to consider a minute of appreciation for Jack's really remarkable service to NaCCRA, not only as a board member, but in many other capacities. I don't know if the minute I've drafted is adequate for the situation, but you all will help me improve it if it isn't. So this is a very important moment of transition for NaCCRA with Jack changing his role, but Jack has indicated his willingness to continue being an associate of NaCCRA and helping us out. So that's
I'm a
good.
life member, so
That's right.
you can't escape.
Can't escape. I'm Frank Little, and I'm a guest. I'm here because I had the opportunity, I decided to take the opportunity to do this as well as visit with family. I have a daughter and grandchildren in the area. She lives out in Ocean City, or in Berlin, actually, and some other things that made it useful for me to come back. So I decided why not. So I thought I'd sit in, and Jack and Dan was very kind and said, fine, it'd be okay if I did. I live in Horizon House. Horizon House is about 50 years old. We passed our 50th birthday, I guess, 3 years ago. We have, as I said, 450. We have 3 towers right in the center of Seattle. We were started basically 50 years ago with the concept, I think, for almost the idea of being pied-à-terres for people who were ready to leave their homes and retire to their second homes on the lakes and islands around Seattle, but they needed a house place in the city because the men needed to want to keep working. So we have a whole background of having developed from a group of people who were probably in their 60s or just under their 60s when Horizon House started. It's evolved over time and is aged out now to, I would say, pretty close to the general demographics that you're talking about. So I've been there about 6 years, but I had a long history of it, connection with it through my family. And it's, I think that's about all I could say at this point.
I would add something to that, though. Sure. I just had the pleasure, I met Frank just recently when in Seattle, but then had the pleasure of spending the morning with him today. Now, Horizon House, that he's alluded to, is unusual in the industry in having a very strong balance sheet. And he was looking at a little study I did for Maryland in response to concerns that Bill Root had about deepening insolvency. Frank was very surprised to find that roughly half the CCRCs in Maryland are financially impaired. And so I suspect, without having to say, that that's probably the true across the country. So if so, that's a major problem that would be below the surface of awareness of most people. And I was telling Bill before that Ericsson, for example, has not recognized on its balance sheet the liability for the refund obligations under the new accounting rules that are coming into effect. And when that does, that will have a material impact on the finances of the Ericsson communities, Green Spring, the one in Silver Spring, the Oak Crest, and a number. So I think there's an awful lot going on here, and there's work that will be continuing to be done. Frank is unique in coming from an acquisitions and mergers and acquisitions background with a large for-profit company. So he is very, very knowledgeable, and he's going to be a tremendous asset in Washington as they begin to address these challenges there. They have one particular CCRC that's very large and impaired, and that presents a challenge to those residents.
Since you mentioned Green Spring, I will tell you that we have, I think, $112 million in the bank.
Sure.
And so I think we're solvent.
Okay.
By the way, one thing I forgot to mention is that NaCCRA has really come into Washington within the last year and a half. I don't know that there really were any members to speak of before that. Two things specifically have probably brought us up. One, we had a battle in our particular CCRC over the management going out and looking at creating a village, which they wanted to fund, which got a lot of our people upset about spending money. At another CCRC over in the Redmond area, they were looking at putting in a situation in Gig Harbor to build a new one, and a lot of the residents got upset about that. The net result of this has been that all of a sudden we have, I guess, a pretty good set of numbers. We have 38 NaCCRA members in Horizon House, and they have some 80 across the bay in Emerald Heights. And then there's another group that are having a similar upset problem at Timber Ridge, and that is creating membership there. So it's interesting. I don't think any of us even knew that NaCCRA existed. A year and a half ago, I don't think there are very many people in Washington, other than Bob, who would have been really familiar with NaCCRA. Out of these problems is what has generated our interest. And now we're looking at going into the legislature to try and get legislative action on a Bill of Rights. We're getting active in a number of different things, but it's all come because of this kind of thing. So it's an indication of how this is outside of a world here in the East that has a general understanding and acceptance of NaCCRA. That is not true when you get into the West or in the Northwest.
I'm Walton Boyer. I'm a retired naval officer, the captain. My field was nuclear physics, and I worked on the other end on the warheads rather than the reactors, so I didn't see Rickover very often. But, and I worked for the Star Wars program after I retired. I am currently the president of the North Carolina Continuing Care Residents Association, which has about 3,600 members. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many are NaCCRA members, and I don't know how many NaCCRA members I have recruited in the last year. I didn't keep count, frankly. But I live at Deerfield in Asheville, North Carolina. That's in the western part of the state in the Cherokee Mountains. We're celebrating our 60th anniversary. The first 44 years was as a nursing home, and then it became a CCRC. And later on I'll say, well, not today, but perhaps a little bit about the transition, because I was on the board of the Evergreens in New Jersey during its transition from a nursing home to CCRC.
What motivated the Evergreens to want to be a CCRC instead?
When I joined the board in '84, it was very obvious that they would be bankrupt in 7 years. We could look at the finances and see that coming up.
Mm.
And we contracted with Ernst & Young to do a demographic and financial assessment of the situation. They did a demographic study that showed that there was sufficient population of interest in the area that we could indeed create a CCRC. And financially, they said that the break-even points for population and for occupancy were 200 population and 88% occupancy rate. And I've used those numbers as a benchmark ever since in terms of looking at CCRCs.
So was the appeal that the influx of cash from entry fees would overcome the bankruptcy?
Yeah, well, what Ernst & Young told us was that if we could build 200 apartments and we could maintain 88% occupancy, we would have enough income to maintain our sustainability.
And it wasn't a rental community?
No, it was not. It was not a rent. It was originally an Episcopal home. The home had been donated by the president of Campbell's Soup, which was in the area, and had been converted by the church into a nursing home and an assisted living home. We had about 60 acres. The hardest part of the transition was that while we were in the middle of the architecture studies, we had planned to use all 60 acres. The state of New Jersey passed wet care laws, and they hired the Army Corps of Engineers to do assessments.
Did they pass what kind of laws?
Wetlands.
Wetlands laws, yes. And the Army Corps of Engineers came in and said 31 acres of your 60 acres are wetlands. So we had already finished our architectural planning and we're ready to go into the construction phase. We had to start all over again.
Yeah.
So you've been in it since the very beginning.
Yeah. Well, not the very beginning. That 80s was perhaps the middle somewhere. Yeah.
When I lived in southern New Jersey, I was a member of Georgetown Quaker Meeting,
Yeah.
which is just down the block from the Evergreens. So I passed the Evergreens many times, and it's a very lovely.
It's a very lovely community, and we loved Georgetown. We actually lived next door in Laurel, but we went to church in Moorestown and
It's a beautiful community.
really enjoyed it very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm Jean Hurley. I live at Westminster Canterbury on Chesapeake Bay in Virginia Beach. And when we moved in, it was a single high-rise with all of the construction equipment building a second high-rise. There are about 700 residents there. We moved in 2000. They're going to be celebrating their 31st anniversary this year. In addition to the 2 high-rises, they are purchasing what they call villas, which are condos next door, delightful little condos. Otherwise, there are 30 of the villas, and Westminster Canterbury owns 20 of them. When my husband and I moved to Westminster Canterbury in 2000, in the 1 high-rise, we had to wait 3 years to get a 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment. And one became available in 2000, and we moved in. In 2010, my husband went to the nursing home. He has normal pressure hydrocephalus, which he has dementia, and his legs don't work. He has to have a mechanical lift to get him in and out of bed and off of his wheelchair and into bed. So when he went to the healthcare unit, I downsized to a one-bedroom, one-bath apartment. When we moved in, we had been paying on long-term insurance for 10 years. And we elected to keep our long-term insurance and get $70,000 off of the entry fee and have 180 days in health care. So right now, Ed's he's not in a private room, he's in what they call a duplex. You have an entry hall with a bathroom and then 2 rooms that each have separate doors. It's very comfortable, works very well. And the charge for that duplex is $301 a day, which comes to $107,000 a year. Of that $107,000 a year, the insurance company, the long-term insurance, is paying $72,000. When Ed moved in 4 years ago, his Social Security made up the difference. Now, it's not quite making up the difference anymore because the cost goes up every year. So so I'm living in an apartment, and of course I'm still. My husband's considered a community patient now. He's not considered a resident, but he's the kind that Westminster Canterbury likes to bring in because we bring in a lot of community patients who are recovering, who don't live at Westminster Canterbury, and they have a positive impact on the bottom line. And the fact that my husband became a community patient makes a big difference to them. If we, they are bringing in a lot more than they would have if we had decided to have them cover all of our health care costs. Now, I think what would have happened if we had stayed in the apartment and had not elected to keep the long-term insurance, I would become the primary resident in the apartment. And my husband then would be in health care, and there would be, I don't know how that works.
Okay, I don't know how your contract works.
We still have to pay the same monthly fee.
Mhm.
We don't have an additional cost because
you
we're
have a
moving
type
to
A
health care.
contract.
Yeah.
You have type of,
So-
yeah, what struck me was that you speak of the provider as they, and I contrast that with Pete, who speaks of his provider as we.
Oh.
Is there a distinction there, or do you think?
Yeah, we make a distinction between the residents and the administration. We're the residents, they are the administration.
I see,
But didn't you say you actually own the place?
yeah.
So you are us.
We
You're not
are,
them.
we are they.
Well, when you say you own it, you operate under the nonprofit law. Are all residents members in the corporation?
No.
Well, then how do you own it if it's nonprofit?
Well, I think the board of directors owns it now.
Well, what's a member?
We don't have members in that sense.
Okay, it's vested in
We did buy the
the,
facility from Erickson, but we don't have a corporation to deal with it.
Do you pay Erickson a fee for their services as a manager?
They manage it for us, yes.
No, do you pay them a fee, or
Yes.
or do they get your regular monthly fees go into their pot?
No, that stays with us, but
Then you still own
they
it.
charge a fee for management.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
then you still own it,
And
yeah.
are they for profit? Is the management
What?
company, a for profit?
Yes.
Right.
So a non-for-profit entity hires a for-profit entity to do the running of the place. What I think remains uncertain at this point is whether Inn's Choice, Green Spring, and all these Erickson communities each have a board which is a self-perpetuating body of people with 1 or 2 resident members, or whether in some sense the residents as a consortium, a condominium, or cooperative own the place. I think that's what we don't know
Well, they could own it as members. For example, we have a resident, well, I'll use Frank Little because that's easier. Ours is forming. But anyway, Frank, they have a 501c3 for the residents only.
Right.
And the residents, every resident is a member of the association, and through that, a member of the 501c corporation. So the members of the nonprofit corporation are the residents.
Right.
Now,
And they select the board.
That's only with regard to our in-house
Your activities.
residents, community,
Your
residents
activities.
council. That's just for the activities.
yeah,
The
not.
board has a single, which happens to be the United Church of Christ
Right.
Conference, is the sole member
Right.
of of Verizon.
Right.
Yeah, but I use it as an example to show that
Yeah.
a nonprofit can have many members.
Right.
Often they do what they did just to simplify the governance.
Right.
Here, the Pacific Conference, or the whatever it is, the Northwest Conference of the United Church of Christ is the member. So as the member, they can remove the board and
Right.
replace the board. So they in effect are the owners.
The residents can remove the board.
No.
No.
The residents can remove the board of the Residents Association.
Right.
There are two corporations. There's one that owns the buildings, runs the services and everything.
Right.
That's owned by this church group, and they run everything.
Right.
The other is the Residents Association that does the Christmas gifts,
Right, right.
handles the activities,
Right, and that's,
and they have.
that's right, and that's the same at Pennswood Village as well. I mean, we are a 501c3 residents association.
Exactly.
And we run the Christmas pageant and the concerts and the lectures and things like that.
So one of the
Yeah.
things I was discussing with Frank this
Yeah.
morning was if your residents association that runs all the Christmas and all that were to buy the facility
Right,
from the other
right,
guys,
right.
then all the residents would be the
Right.
members and they'd be
Right.
the governing.
But we don't know if Green Spring is such a case as.
But I mean, Pete's a lawyer, so he knows.
No, well,
I mean,
I would interpret from what Pete said, that it's sort of like getting your taxes done by some outside firm, that it's your money,
Right.
but they're telling you what the taxes are that you have to pay. And if you had a financial advisor that prepared a budget for you every year and told you how much you could spend on this and that and another thing, very similar kind of situation. It's your money, but they tell you how you could spend it.
The only saving grace is that we've got 1,400 people on the waiting list, and
Yeah.
they've all paid $1,000 to be on that list.
That helps.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you said you had $110 million of reserves, cash equivalent reserves. That's a good position to be in.
So are you 100% occupancy?
99.1 at this point.
Yes, effectively.
And I reported that to the people at NaCCRA, and one time I said, well, we're no longer 99%. They all kind of laughed. I said 98.9 at this point.
Okay, well, thank you, Gene. Yes, Ron?
I'm Ron Patterson, resident of Green Spring. Fairly new resident. My wife and I have been here less than a year and a half, and have become moderately active, and part of that activism, I guess, parlayed into my getting elected president of the NaCCRA organization here, which is a state of rebuilding, and that's
I'm going to go out there and get her story.
that's a project that hopes to accomplish somewhat this year. Back when I had a real job, I also was a high school teacher in Arlington County, Virginia. With my wife and I lived in this area for almost 30 years. And I was a government teacher, had some interesting time in class. Working in Arlington, you get some interesting students. Had all Colton Powell's kids in class. Probably the most famous was Sandy Bullock. Sandy went to is an Arlingtonian. So when I retired from that, my wife and I moved to the beach, moved to Delaware beaches, and we built a beach house over there. We have 2 children, 6 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren.
Wow.
And for a while, the place was pretty full. And then the kids started to get into dancing and soccer and that sort of thing.
Oh, is that
We were supporting a very big house I built with a few people in it. And additionally, as the years rolled along, we were there 17 years, we began to pay attention to healthcare, which on the Eastern Shore, Maryland, Virginia, Delaware is, well, I used to tell folks, if you have jellyfish bites or sunburns, you're okay. Much beyond that, forget about healthcare. And so we began looking around for coming back. All the kids and grandkids and great-grandkids all live here. We moved and they did. And so we began looking around, bought Green Spring and investigated very thoroughly, and thought indeed it would meet our needs. And so night before Thanksgiving, not this last night, but pre-Thanksgiving, we moved here. And
Right.
very, very happy.
Did you go to Thanksgiving dinner then?
Yes, we did. I'll tell you a funny story. Obviously, when you make a move to this kind of situation, it's more than just moving from a house to a house. It's a move to a lifestyle. And the first night we were here for a meal was indeed Thanksgiving. And as Peter said, there are 3 major dining halls, 2 other restaurants. And so we had all those places we could go eat. And we went upstairs to the dining hall close to us, and we check in. They asked, do y'all want to eat by yourself, or do you want to be with more people? I meet some people. They took us over to a table that had 5 seats, 3 of them occupied, 2 vacant for my wife and myself. And we looked at the people, the 3 there, couldn't believe it. They were neighbors of ours that we lived in our neighborhood. We had not seen in 17 years. Their daughter was with them. Their daughter had grown up with our sons. And so as we're sitting there munching turkey, we're exchanging stories about the old neighborhood, who's still there, who's not there. But of all the places we could have gone to eat, all the times we could have gone to eat, all the places they could put, I looked at my wife and I said, this is really supposed to be, that this isn't.
Yeah, God wanted you to know you were way, yeah, that's a wonderful
So
sign.
that's how we started out, and it's got better ever since.
Now, the PS is that he plays the piano, and I'm already lobbying that he play the piano as we gather in the auditorium.
Excellent. Ron, thank you. Listen, I'm going to interrupt before we're going to have to wait with bated breath for Judy's introduction. The food is going to disappear at 3. It's now 2 minutes to 3. I want to give people a chance to grab food if you want food.
The cookies will be brought in here.
The cookies are brought in here, but if you
Water
want
and
a
iced tea are on
sandwich,
that bench over there.
if you want a sandwich, you have to go out and grab it now.
But I would like some iced tea.
Or you may want to take, maybe Judy, if you don't mind, we'll hold up on your
I
introduction.
want them all to wait.
Okay, and we'll take a 5-minute break
Okay.
for whatever.
Then I'll get some coffee.